Thanks so much. Thank you all. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank Véronique Picard, the Youth Council co-chair. Bonjour, Anine Tanse. Je tiens d'abord à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles nous sommes rassemblés font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé des Mohawks, qui a longtemps servi de lieu de rassemblement et d'échange entre les nations. I want to say, first of all, it's a really huge honor for me to be here. I take the opportunity to be able to address the AFN General Assembly like this as a huge honor. It's something that I feel very special that I've been allowed to speak to you all. And I want to start off with some thank yous, because there's a lot of important people in this room I want to thank. First of all, I want to thank your National Chief Cindy Woodhouse. You have a very important role, lots of responsibility, and I thank you for all the hard work. I want to thank the elders and knowledge keepers. It's so important for us to honor the elders, to honor knowledge keepers, their knowledge, their wisdom, and I want to thank them. At the same time, I also want to thank the youth. The youth are not just our future, they're our present. I want to thank the youth that are here as well. I want to thank the veterans for your sacrifice and your service. And of course, I want to thank the chiefs. Each one of you has a very important role in your communities, lots of responsibilities, and you do a very important work, and I want to thank you for that hard work. Merci encore, c'est vraiment un honneur pour moi d'être ici avec vous. C'est vraiment un honneur. I've talked with many of you, and I've heard you loud and clear. You continue to face significant injustice and human rights violations, frankly. You are denied basic human rights. You've shared with me your concerns about overcrowding in your communities, of homes that are in deplorable conditions, dilapidated, and how this is a result of decades of underfunding by both liberal and conservative governments. I've heard from you that even if homes are doubled in community, doubling the number of homes in community would still not be enough to meet the needs. I've heard from you about your concerns about not having access to clean drinking water, something that is so obviously a fundamental right that continues to be denied. And your concerns that these very substandard living conditions are a result of underfunding. I've heard from you that you feel abandoned in the fight against the climate crisis, that you've been left to deal with the impacts of that on your own, and many of your communities are amongst the hardest hit by climate crisis. I've heard from you that Indigenous women and girls are getting murdered at a rate 6 times higher than non-Indigenous women and girls, and this is so fundamentally wrong. All of this, all these things I've outlined are the results of colonialism and genocide, and it has to end. Nine years ago, you were promised real change. Trudeau made a lot of promises. Lots of promises. Promised to lift long time standing long-term boil water advisories by March of 2021, and he broke that promise. Today, there are still 28 boil water advisories in effect, and dozens of communities that can't trust their water even though they don't even have an advisory. I've been to Niskandiga, and Niskandiga is one of those communities that has had a boil water advisory for 29 years. You've got people that have grown up never knowing what it's like to be able to turn on the tap and get clean water. Il a promis de mettre en œuvre les 94 appels à l'action. Il n'en a réalisé que 13 à ce jour et pas un seul l'année dernière. Il a promis d'investir dans des refuges pour des femmes et filles autochtones victimes de violences. Il n'a conçu aucun nouveau refuge. We've heard Justin Trudeau say that his most important relationship is with Indigenous people. But sadly, I think it's all been just for show. One example, our teammate, one of our New Democrat MPs, Leah Gazan, tried to include free prior informed consent in the Canada Early Learning and Childcare Act, and the Liberals voted against it. I feel like Justin Trudeau only shows up when it's good for him. So I completely understand those who are frustrated by this government. I am too. I see the power that they have and the ability they could have used to use that power to make things better, and they've refused to do so. So it is clear in the next election we need change. But people will have to choose what type of change they want. And I feel, for Indigenous people, it's clear where Pierre Poilievre stands. He has promised so-called economic reconciliation, but he voted against harmonizing Canada's laws with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Not once, but twice. So for him, economic reconciliation doesn't mean respecting your fundamental rights. Because ultimately, he doesn't want you to have free, prior, and informed consent. What he really wants is for his rich developer buddies to get richer off of your resources, and he doesn't want you to make the decisions. And I think that's wrong. For him, it means cutting services, cutting funding for Indigenous health and Indigenous services. He talks a lot about freedom. But what he really wants is freedom for himself. For him, when he says freedom, freedom means not respecting treaty obligations. For him, freedom means not respecting your rights. For him, freedom means not getting your free, prior, and informed consent. After all, he's the guy that said Indigenous people need a stronger work ethic, not compensation for the atrocities committed in residential schools. All right? He's a guy that said that chiefs like you have too much power. That's literally what he said. He's a guy who speaks to anti-Indigenous organizations very recently, not years ago, but very recently, denying the truth of residential schools. He's a guy who right now has let a very well-known residential school denier, Aaron Gunn, run for his party. That's who he really is. When someone shows you who they are, you got to believe them, especially when they show you again and again and again. Il ne fera jamais ce qu'il faut pour que justice soit rendue aux populations autochtones. Il réduira vos services et vous rendra responsable des difficultés que vous vivez. For New Democrats, we have a very different view of what economic reconciliation means. For us, economic reconciliation cannot happen unless it means respecting your rights to free, informed, prior consent. It means that you make decisions on your lands, on your territories, with your resources. You are in control of your destiny. It means upholding your rights to housing, clean drinking water, and all of the human rights that have been so long violated. That's what New Democrats are fighting for, and that's what we will continue to fight for. Just recently, Leah Gazan worked hard to have the House of Commons in support of all New Democrats. We pushed to make sure we recognize the genocide happening against Indigenous people. We also worked to ensure that the Red Dress Alert pilot project is being launched to keep Indigenous women and girls safe. Yeah. As a team, we are fighting to make sure we find every opportunity to include informed prior consent in legislation, including the national childcare legislation. Our team supports our Indigenous MPs like Leah, who is a fierce leader in ensuring women and children are lifted up. Her bill on guaranteed livable basic income is gaining ground, and we support her work. Another one of our teammates, Lori Idlout, is working to ensure First Nation rights are upheld. She's making sure to have legislation that returns jurisdiction to First Nations. She's working to close the infrastructure gaps, to protect Indigenous languages, to ensure First Nations have safe and affordable housing and funding for Indigenous policing. All of our teammates, but I'll shout out a couple of them in particular: Blake Desjardins, Nikki Ashton, Charlie Angus, Taylor Backrack, Gord Johns, Carol Hughes, and Rachel Blaney are names that I'm sure you know in your communities. These are folks that have fought very hard for your rights to be upheld. Every one of us, all New Democrats, unequivocally, are using our power to add our voice to yours, to force government to do the things they would not have done otherwise. You might have heard recently, in face of that $350 billion infrastructure gap, the Liberals chose now as a time to also bring in billions in cuts to the services you rely on. Well, I made it clear that that was wrong, and we forced the Liberals to reverse those cuts. I know you are fighting every day for your rights to be respected. I believe it's time for you to have a government that truly respects you. When I was a kid, my mom taught me this teaching that's very important in the Sikh tradition, in my tradition, that we are all one. And she would say that when we look at the people around us, we have to imagine that that's us, that we are all connected so deeply that we are literally one people. And it means that if anyone around us, as a kid, my mom really enforced and taught me this repeated this again and again, put a lot of emphasis on this, that if any one of us are hurting, we're all hurting. But if we lift the people up around us, if we lift the people that are in our communities, that are in our neighborhoods, that are all around us, if we lift the people up, we all rise together. That's why I'm in politics. I want a Canada where we all rise together, where we lift each other up, all of us. I believe we can build a country where we have more time for joy and less worry, where we have more hope and less fear, where we have more justice and more compassion and less greed. I want to work with you, truly work with you, in a true nation-to-nation relationship to ensure that all communities have safe housing and good infrastructure, clean water, that we use Indigenous knowledge to fight against climate change and protect our land, water, and air. We want to ensure that everyone has access to Indigenous health care, high-speed broadband, and Indigenous policing that's properly funded. I want to work with you to finally put an end to the genocide against Indigenous women. I want to make sure that all the TRC calls to action and all of the MMIWG calls to justice are implemented once and for all. I want to make sure your inherent and treaty and First Nations rights are upheld. And I want to make sure that the federal government provides adequate support to First Nations so that you can make contributions to the Canadian economy and lead healthy and prosperous lives. Together, I believe we can rebuild First Nations capacity and support Indigenous-led institutions so we can walk together, so we can work together to lift up First Nations, to amplify your strengths and ensure your knowledge is a part of the decisions impacting your own lives. No more empty promises. In the next election, you've got a choice. between liberals who've let you down, conservatives who want to cut and gut the services you rely on and who continue to deny your truths, or New Democrats who are fighting for your rights, who are standing with you, shoulder to shoulder, and walking towards a true nation-to-nation relationship. Lors des prochaines élections, vous pouvez choisir un gouvernement qui souhaite vraiment bâtir une relation nation à nation. I can tell you, without a doubt, we will never stop fighting for justice for Indigenous people. I know that these assemblies are very important opportunities to align priorities, but know this: the NDP is here for you. We will always be here for you. During the next months, I hope to visit more of your communities as my commitment to learn how to better work with you continues. I want to thank you again for all the great work you do, and I want you to know you can count on me as an ally, as someone that wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with you in building that brighter future together. Merci. Thank you. Miigwech. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jagmeet Singh. We now have time for a few questions. I remember you that we don't have a lot of time, so if from the beginning you can remember that, and if you don't need all your time for your questions, you can already from the beginning share your time with your colleagues in the line behind you. So I will start with the mic on number 1.
When Zoom and question is quenched. Good morning, and thank you, Jagmeet, for attending, and thank you for your words. Regrettably, we didn't get a chance to hold Paul over the barbecue any longer than we could, but I'll ask you the same question, but I already have heard you answer this to me in the past. I'm hoping that you will denounce and force the other governments to denounce the doctrine of discovery. We've asked the Pope to do it. The Pope won't do it. I'm hoping that you'll start there. If we start there, then a lot of the things that were discussed earlier will help. And I just wanted to say that. So, and also the unleashing of the opportunities for us. Some of our nations want our land left exactly the way they are. We know the resources are in our backyard. We want to be able to say no. And we don't have that option right now. So, Cook's Jim.
Election 1 and Jawan Quest Lease Behan Cook Bevan Sletku in the Cup Nation, BC. I remember speaking to you when you first came to the AFN, and I asked a commitment from you to come to BC and speak with the BC Chiefs and to meet with the Nicola 5. I extend that invitation back to you again, and hopefully I hear back from you. Kukshem.
Can continue with one more question.
Thank you, Speaker. Chief Bruce Atkinson, Martin Falls First Nation. I wanted to ask, what the flowery words with Jagmeet, I just wanted to know, he stands with the Liberal government today to promote more of the status quo on Indian Act policy and how it deprives our communities of growth. In my community, we had no growth for over 20 years. No growth plan, no supports from the Liberal government, yet his party continues to uphold the Liberals and their power. Jagmeet, your power has the power to change this, but still more of the status quo for First Nations on reserve and no growth in terms of housing. Infrastructure is badly needed, and you can not only fix the water, but you could also fix the infrastructure that's needed. My community is closest to the Ring of Fire. That's our traditional land. We're working with the provincial government to make changes, but the federal government is reluctant to do so. You need to come to the table, Jagmeet, with your buddy Pierre, not Pierre, but with Justin, and move things along for First Nations in the North. Yet you don't seem to do so. You stay in Ottawa and promote more of the status quo for First Nations. Now is the time to act, Jagmeet, and promote a good future for our youth and our communities. And we don't need more flowery words. We need action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chiefs, for your questions. We will now let Mr. Singh answer.
Thank you so much. I'll start off with the first question on the doctrine of discovery. Inherently a racist doctrine. Of course, I denounce it. There is no way that makes any sense. It denied the reality of Indigenous people. And yes, I wholeheartedly denounce the fundamentally racist belief. And the chief also asked, thank you. The chief also asked, what free, prior, informed consent means. What the United Nations Declaration means is that Indigenous communities can say yes or no to projects. That's what it should be, fundamentally. And Indigenous communities should be able to make that decision. And they should be able to make that decision meaningfully. And that we need to work in collaboration as nation to nation, as partners. And whether that means in protecting the land, whether that means in moving forward with a project, whatever that means, it means that Indigenous communities are at the table making those decisions. And I can say that with full confidence, I believe in that. That's what I believe in, that if we want to see growth or development, it has to happen with Indigenous communities. If Indigenous communities want to go a different path, that is also their right. And we have to work together for that. Thank you. The chief, BC Chiefs Lees Bahan invited, again, extended an invitation. We will definitely follow up with you, Chief. I hope I can get someone from my team to get your contact right now, and I'll try our best to follow up with that. I want to meet with as many Indigenous leaders and communities as I can, and so thank you for that invitation. And then the last question, I think it's something on people's minds, so I appreciate the question from the Chief. I've shared with you that I am frustrated with the current government, and there will be an election, and people will have a choice in that election. What we've done often, and this is something that I really believe in, is we get elected, and there's 4-year terms, and what do we do with that power while we're elected? We try our best to use our power to force government to work for you. It's what the first leader of the party has done. Tommy Douglas used his power when there was a minority government to get things done. That's what I believe in. I believe in trying to get things done. Ultimately, people chose a Liberal government. I wish they would have chosen a New Democrat government and a New Democrat Prime Minister. We would have made a lot of different choices, and we would have done things very differently. So we're going to keep on fighting with the power we have to push the government to do more. It is clear that they're not willing to do enough. It's also clear that in the next election, people have a choice. They got a choice with what we saw with Pierre Poilievre and who he really is. And people need to know. We need to go eyes wide open on who he is. He's someone that continues. This is not something that happened in 2008 and then he left it alone. His position on Indigenous people hasn't changed. He continues to show up in spaces that deny residential schools truths. He continues to allow candidates that are residential school deniers to run for his party. That's who he is. And he does not believe that Indigenous people have the right to make decisions about their own resources on their own lands. And so I reject that approach. And I want to put to you that you've got an opportunity for New Democrats who want to work with you. And so the next election is going to be very important. It's an opportunity for us to chart a new course. And I hope that that course is one where you see in me a Prime Minister and see New Democrats an ally that want to work with you and build that brighter future together.
So as we had half an hour for this agenda item, and it's already been half an hour, almost half an hour, we'll have time for mic number 2. But okay, you can stay a little bit longer, so we might have time for more questions. We'll take 3 questions at a time. Mic number 2.
Wali exit book ni John Martin Delwazi proxy bemaru chino sakama rockler keskabe yakleut. Good morning. My name is John Martin. I'm a proxy for Chief Larocque from the Keskabe Mi'kmaq First Nation out on the east coast in Quebec. a question that I was going to put forward earlier, not able to. But right now, whoever forms the next government, this issue remains a concern for those of us who are involved in education. And across this country in the past few years, there's been a couple of education agreements that have been signed. Right now, from what we see happening in Ottawa and within the department, there seems to be a little bit of backing away from those agreements and wanting to go towards a downward trend. That's really a concern because these regional education agreements have really allowed us to bring the standards of education for our children up in the community. And we're not prepared to go backwards. The Indian control of Indian education policy was in 1972. And it's just now that we are getting to a standard of education for some of the communities across the country, because there are still a lot of regional education agreements to be negotiated and signed to bring the standards of education up. So definitely, whoever's in power next, we want those concerns addressed. We want to keep this funding going. It needs to be indexed. It needs to continue to grow so we can maintain the standards of education for our children in the community. So that's the request for your support. I know the NDP has been there a long time supporting us in a lot of these issues. On another issue as well, the second issue is our concern over the Languages Act and the kind of funding that's been provided. Funding that simply does not reflect the need that is there. We are in a critical situation with our languages. We're struggling to survive. And when you're in a critical situation with our languages, you have to be very careful what your next move is. You don't want to go on a downward trend. You need to go on an upward trend where languages are concerned. And I think that right now, what's there, I think needs to be doubled. I mean, 85 million across the country is simply not enough. Okay. Well, audio. Thank you.
As there's still a little bit of time, Chief Daibo, you can go ahead.
Grand Chief Cody Daibo from Kahnawake. So, in the spirit of fairness, I asked your predecessor, not your predecessor, your colleague, the same question. So, today is the anniversary of the 1990 Oka crisis, where we still have not received an apology from Canada for marching troops on their allies. And will your government uphold the White-Montour decision and oppose Vanderbilt and Sparrow going into the future?
Sorry, Grand Chief, I just missed the last part of your question.
I said, would your government uphold the White-Montour decision and oppose Sparrow and Vanderbilt, keeping us frozen in time?
Chief Gary Lehman, Beaver Lake Cree Nation, Treaty 6 territory. I want to acknowledge that the two-row wampum belt was one of the original treaties, and it started right in this area. So I want to acknowledge that. Also, Jagmeet, the Treaty 1 to 11, the sacred treaties, we have a hard time having a seat with the Governor General, with the King. And these are our treaty partners, right? The Crown is our treaty partner. And we need to have a seat with the King, with the Governor General, so we can talk about our issues. It's not just the Government of Canada. You know, they hold a lot of our funding and stuff like that. But our issues are with a lot of times with the Crown. So we need to have that open dialogue with the Governor General. Access to the Governor General is very hard to get. Just one more thing. Open invitation, Treaty 1 to 11 gathering, August 26th to the 30th, Cold Lake, Alberta. You are invited. Thank you.
Okay, we will now give time to Jagmeet Singh to answer.
Thank you so much. First question was around education and the education agreements. We want to see those agreements upheld and us to move forward. I've been to many of the schools. I've been to schools across, Indigenous schools across the country, and it's clear that the funding needs to be indexed, it needs to increase, and we need to lift up the level of education in Indigenous communities.
And that is the direction of those current agreements, and we want to see that accelerated and move forward. We do not want us to go backwards, so that's something that we support, and we'll continue to fight to make sure that education, those agreements continue and are upheld. In addition, the question also touched on languages, and as someone, I learned my language later on in life. My parents were nervous and a little bit embarrassed for me to speak it when I was younger, and then later on thought I should learn it. As kids, you know, kids can be very stubborn, so I didn't. But when I was in my 30s, I tried to learn my language, and I can speak really fluently now. And I can tell you it is such a powerful way to connect with where you come from and where you are. And so I really believe that for languages, this is something that has to be a priority, and it requires significant funding to keep languages alive, to support the growth of and maintenance of those languages. So I really believe this is something so fundamentally important, and my wholehearted support around languages, Indigenous languages, have to be protected, have to be maintained, and have to be grown. The Oka crisis question from Grand Chief, it is a mark on our history that military was used against Indigenous people in that way. It was wrong, and absolutely we should be pushing for a formal apology. I would say that anytime military police are used against Indigenous people, it's wrong that way. And then the specific subject matter of the question was around the decision, which is what the crisis was all about. So I support, again, this is in light of the United Nations Declaration, my belief in free and prior consent, the ability for Indigenous people to do what they want with their land and to be able to have decision-making over their land. I uphold the decisions that support your ability to do that. So of course I would be in favor of opposing the scenario that limits your ability to grow, that keeps you in, like as you put it, suspended in time. I think that is unfair and unjust. And then last question, important question. Chiefs often have a lot of knowledge around treaty and the interesting relationship that Canada has as a country where there's both, of course, the government, but then the Crown and the relationship that is with both. And specific question was about access to the Governor General, and I can see why that is an important request. It's something that I haven't actually turned my mind to, but I'm happy to look at solutions where Indigenous communities can get access to the Governor General as proxy for the Crown. So happy to look at that idea more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whatever you like, I'll be in your hands.
So we'll go on mic number 1.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My name is Kevin McKay. I carry a proxy for the Nisga'a village of Dakhazat. We belong to the Nisga'a Nation. We are 24 years into implementing BC's first modern treaty, and is not without challenges, but still I have hope. And the reason I have hope is because all of the children born May the 11th, 2000, right up to the present time, have not had to live one day under the Indian Act. They live under their own government, the Nisga'a Nation government. So, sir, I am here today to ask for your support in upholding the implementation of BC's first modern treaty. We support the call for an independent office similar to the Auditor General that would report directly to Parliament on treaty implementation challenges. Because if Canada doesn't do that, then all of these treaty making is smoke and mirrors. Because currently, we still report to a department under the Department of Indian Affairs. We demand an independent office similar to the Auditor General. Thank you, sir.
As we started this way, we'll continue on mic number 1 again, since there's still time.
Good morning, Jagmeet. Thank you for attending our assembly. And thank you for reflecting on the basic needs of the people who live on the reserve, the need for housing and safe drinking water. Thank you for recognizing there's 28 boil water advisories outstanding in Canada. Ontario region has the majority of those boil water advisories. First Nations have been waiting decades, waiting and wondering if they can protect the health and safety of the people that live in their community because of the lack of access to safe drinking water. Urgent money is needed now, not after the election. You have the ability to, and the Prime Minister, to go to the Consolidated Revenue Fund to get additional money that's needed now to address the need for safe drinking water in Ontario and across Canada, and the urgent need for investment in housing so that people won't live in overcrowded, unsafe houses, or families with children won't be homeless. I want to know, will you do that now?
Thank you. We will go on mic number 2. We will return to mic number 1, and it will be the last question. So 2 last questions.
Good morning, Chief Andy Alec, Big Stone Cree Nation. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to meet with the First Nations people today. I want to speak on a few items, and I know that you had mentioned that we need good infrastructure. We need excellent infrastructure within the nations, but also equitable infrastructure. We see in our neighboring communities, within the municipalities, and within our provinces that our infrastructure isn't equitable. We need access to all the social determinants of health, education, housing. We need access to the data to show the disparities within our nations in comparison to our neighboring communities. We also want to know what action items are you willing to work on regardless of you getting in as our next Prime Minister. We need to be able to measure the disparities of our First Nations people, determine a path forward, and strategize in partnership with every level of government to see how we're going to improve the quality of life of our First Nations people today and tomorrow. I want to know what is going to happen when and if you get in. How are these action items going to be achieved realistically? We hear a number of times when people campaign, the promises that are broken, and they have been broken for the last few decades and the last 150 plus years. We also need to ensure that our treaties are recognized, not only at a federal level, but also at the provincial level. We need to ensure that the resources of our First Nations are being brought back for the benefit of our First Nations people. I want to know how that is going to happen. We also need to ensure that the future generations of our children are able to identify with their First Nations community. There's so many people that have been lost because of Indian residential schools in the 60s scoop. How are we going to identify our First Nations people that have lost their identity with their communities? Big Stone Cree Nation has lost so many people because of the opioid crisis as well. We have a number of houseless people, homeless people. How is the federal government going to be able to support shortage of housing when the traumas of Indian residential school are still there? We no longer need Band-Aid solutions. We need long-term sustainable funding to implement positive change for our people that are affected by the traumas that Canada had put in place. I also want to extend an invite to you to come to Treaty 8, as well as extending an invite to Big Stone Cree Nation, so you could see firsthand the disparities that we face every day as First Nations people. Thank you.
Okay, so since it's the last questions and there's still 48 seconds on this mic, we only give you this time to speak. And then we'll go over to mic 1. Microphone number 2.
Good morning, Jagmeet. Proxy Clint Peters, Buketjanon Territory, Walpole Island First Nation. I have a question regarding the Jay Treaty of 1794. It seems that Canada is in serious violation of not honoring this treaty. It affects our territory, it affects our people. We cannot cross freely in the border. There is no border. We should be unmolested, whether it's work, trade, school, living, whatever it is. We want answers for that. We've been fighting that for years. The fight is going to continue, and I'd like to know what your government plans on doing for this and for our community and our territory. Miigwech.
Thank you. We'll go over to microphone number 1.
I was just standing here waiting for the Jagmeet to answer. So
Okay.
Out of respect for him.
Okay. And we'll take the question behind you, and that will be all. Thank you.
Good morning, Raymond Fletcher Dinkath, St. Joseph's Point, Nunthe, and Shinyo Nation. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere. My community is isolated, remote area. We're planning on building an all-season road from Barons River all the way up to St. Joseph's Point. And I'm here to ask Mr. Jagmeet Singh here to advocate on our behalf. All the proposals, all the plans, the scoping study proposals have all been submitted. Everything is in there. Some options, all the options are there. We just need a yes or a no from the federal government to give us the money to start building. Also want to extend invitation to you to come to our territory. There's 4 First Nations up there on the lake. And I think it will be Damanasan, Kisimuit Kipizain. Bandawapan Daman Kaisakapisyank, Egamna Kainati Dangut in our area. Because it's a beautiful country up there. We have proud people over there. And we live in one of the most poorest area in Canada. But when you look at the landscape, you look at the waters, everything is fresh. And we have natural resources available to us. We want to protect those. At the same time, we want to balance the economic development in our area, because we believe in being a sovereign nation. In order to be sovereign, we don't need to ask for permission from anybody. We don't need to ask the province, we don't need to ask the federal government, can we do this, can we have this? We want to be sovereign, we got to do it on our own. And you follow what we say, because you want to create our own laws. And this is going to be part of the resolution that will be coming up later on. My resolution is telling the people, the federal governments, that we want to create our own laws. When we do that, you have to honor and acknowledge and follow them, our own guideline, and because we know our land. We're from the land. So you come to our territory, we'll do business. And you also have the balance of power, because the federal government is a minority government. You can tell them, go support them. I want to support them, you have to support them. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Chief. Last speaker.
Good morning. My name is Regina Crowchild, proxy for Chief Whitney from Tsuut'ina Nation. Mr. Jagmeet, I want to first of all thank you for willing to hear more questions, because too many times when the conservatives or the liberals come in, we're limited to a certain time, and they don't even offer to stay to listen to us more. They just come in, they're just like a whirlwind. They come in and they're gone, you know, telling us sweet words, giving us sweet words, and we have to read between the lines and know what their intents are. So I want to thank you.
Can we put 3 minutes on the timer? Can we put 3 minutes on the timer, please?
What?
Thank you.
Are you taking up my time?
No, no, I'm sorry. I'm putting you more time. Okay. I'm putting you more time, sorry.
So we know the NDP has never been in government. It's always been the Conservatives and the Liberals. And today, but I do know that NDP makes agreements with the Liberals or who they're going to support on with certain conditions that benefits your party, like pharmacare and other stuff. And both parties need your support to get what they want. So whoever you side with tends to get their legislations in and approved. So I'm asking you, the Liberal Party has been trying to get rid of our international treaties. They're not trying, they're in the process. They talk about the Indian Act, which they're going to get rid of, and yes, that Indian Act stripped our people of their authority as sovereign nations. It did. So now, the Liberal Party, Trudeau is saying, oh, I want to do a great thing, I want to get rid of the Indian Act. But in the meantime, he's recolonizing us, keeping us subordinate to the Canadian government through other policies like the Land Management Act, you know, which is going to make our lands fee simple. They give us 10-year agreements with no guarantee after 10 years to look after the promises of treaty that the Canadian federal government has, that the Imperial Crown gave them. We're not here to look for handouts. We are here, just wait, we are here to look and make sure that our peoples prosper. Our peoples live in poverty, and you know that very well. So what are you going to do to help us that Canada can quit recolonizing us and ensure that there'll always be Indians? I know you're real Indian, but anyway, us Indians, Red Indians, us Red Indians, as they call us, that will always be here and will always have our territories for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. Right now, Canada's trying to do away with that. So,
thank you, Miigwech. Thank you.
Wait, one more sentence. You're just taking up my time. One more sentence.
You have your
what
4
are
minutes.
you going to do to help us for Canada to live according to the spirit and intent of our international treaties with the Imperial Crown, which Canada has no business interfering with? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much. It was worth sticking around, I gotta tell you. First off, I know that the chief who asked the question wanted to stay standing to receive the answer, so I appreciate the honor that you're giving me, but I can still respond to the first question, the second question. But the first question was about the Niska Nation. I think that there's a lot of good that's being done around the modern treaties. I think this is could be a very potentially powerful step forward. But the question was, the treaty can be good, but it's about the implementation. And if the implementation is not there, then it really takes away from the potential good. So the question was around my support for the implementation of the treaty. Yes, full support for that. But specifically the question was, the way it's structured is that even if it's a modern treaty, you still have to work with the minister who is governed underneath the Indian Act, and that's undermining all of that. So I hear you on that. And so the call was, could there be a different, or a demand was for a different system to go directly to an independent office like the Auditor General's that doesn't sit underneath the Indian Act. I think that's a really good solution. I haven't looked at that specifically, but I think it makes a lot of sense that if you're a modern treaty, you don't want to then have to go back to working within an Indian Act structure. So I see the argument there, and I'm happy to work on a solution that doesn't make you have to go under the same system that you want to be separate from under a modern treaty. So I hear you on that. This is the question that the chief had waited. The second question was the chief wanted to hear the answer and was standing there. I appreciate that respect. It was around acknowledging that the housing and water are issues, but what am I going to do to push for it now? And I think it's a very good question that, of course, I want to be the next Prime Minister to make these decisions with the full power of government, but I'm not going to wait until then. And so right now we are pushing the government to move on housing, to move on water, and we are using the leverage we have to push them to act right now, to get money flowing right now. So we are doing that, and we're going to keep, oh, there you are, Chief. And we're going to keep on doing that. So you're right. It's not, we don't have to wait till the next election. We're pushing for that now and using the power that we have to try to get results now. Next question was on equitable funding and also data. The chief was really concerned about not just good infrastructure, but excellent infrastructure and equitable infrastructure. Maybe people remember the question that I was posed about water, and someone said, well, how much is it going to cost? What if it costs too much? And I said, well, you wouldn't ask that question if we were talking about clean water in Montreal or clean water in Vancouver or in Toronto. Same with infrastructure. You wouldn't ask that question. So I agree that it should be equitable infrastructure, and it means that giving the first people of this land a fair shot at building a bright future, you have to have equitable infrastructure that's equal to the communities around them, and acknowledges that in some cases, if it's been so bad for so long, we have to make bigger investments in. So this is something I believe in, and I've been constantly pushing for that. The other question was around data to make better decisions and to point out the impacts being not equitable, and having better data to show that the outcomes are different. I think that's a very good point. We need to be able to have good data to show that the outcomes are unfair, and so I support ways to get better data. And then the last two were acknowledging the trauma of residential schools. Absolutely, that trauma is still being impacted, or still being felt today, the impacts. And some of the solutions were long-term sustainable funding. I agree, that's one of the major solutions, working with First Nations, long-term sustainable funding to address the trauma. The specific question by another chief was on the 1794 treaty, and that there's violations going on. I'm not familiar with that specific treaty, but I'm happy to work with any nation that's being impacted by violations of treaty rights in ways that I can advocate to be a champion to support your call. I think you were particularly concerned about free movement, particularly over borders, and that treaty is being violated. Happy to work with you on that issue. There was a chief asking a question specifically for Teresa Point about advocating for a road. These are type of issues that we've been pushing for. Recently, we pushed for funding for a hospital in Northern Ontario that was long promised but not delivered. We were able to get that funding. It's helping primarily Indigenous communities. So happy to push for projects like that. A lot of communities that are right now isolated could have a road built, and they could be connected to other communities. I think we need to be doing more of that work. So happy to look at that project. Last question was, this was by Regina Crowchild. Very powerful. I feel like another round of applause for the lots of great points that were raised. And Regina Crowchild acknowledged that I waited. I've been to AFNs in the past, AFN assemblies, and I know how important it is for you to have your voices heard. And so sometimes I may not have all the answers, but I definitely have to hear the questions so I can at least reflect on them and think about them. And so while I give a speech, I hope my speech has weight, I also know hearing from you is maybe even more important. So that's why I try to give it as much time as possible. And I told my team to allow for flexibility after the speech knowing that there might be more questions. So I make that a request, or I make that a demand, that I need to have a flexible schedule after the speech in case there's more questions, so that I can spend the time with you. I think all leaders should do that. I think they know very well that the chiefs will have questions, and so I make sure that that's a commitment to try to give you as much time as possible. So thank you for acknowledging that, Regina Crowchild. Your question was around a lot of important points: international treaties, using our power in this agreement, and using it in the future. Questions about the Indian Act stripping authority from Indigenous communities, and what I'm going to do. I think there was a lot in that question, and so I think it might be another 20-minute speech about how I could respond to all those things. But I think fundamentally, like, just how do we solve any of the problems? I think treating Indigenous communities as equal partners, working together, shoulder to shoulder, not demanding or putting pressures or acting like Ottawa knows all. I think that's the approach to any of these solutions. Any of these problems can be solved with working with Indigenous communities together, true nation-to-nation relationship, hearing from you in terms of what the solutions are, and moving in a way that is respectful, is collaborative. That's the approach. I think it's the spirit that we have to challenge these problems. Approach it with that spirit, and that's what I want to do. I want to approach it with that spirit, that intention. I've seen the federal government very close. I say the closest of anyone that's not in government. I've seen the way they work, and I know there's so many solutions. There's so much that can be done if you've got the will, and that's what I have. I have the will. I'm not satisfied with just moving along slowly. I want to use everything I can to push for quick action, and so I'm going to continue to do that. And that's the spirit I approach all these problems. I care deeply, as my mom taught me, that we are all one. So I care deeply about the challenges you're up against, and I want to be an ally, and I want to work with you. So thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup au chef du nouveau Parti démocratique, Jagmeet Singh.